Good morning. It's been a while since I've made a speculative solidarity video, and I'm going to tell you why. Even though I've been writing down all these different ideas for videos that I wanted to make, to be honest, in the last month or so, I've had to take my own advice in a variety of ways. And that's taken a lot of time and a lot of effort and been very difficult on the body and legitimately. And so, just to review, we've so far done 5 episodes of Speculative Solidarity. And today we'll be talking about some of the concepts that have been brought up before, but you don't need to have watched those. But what they were these. Number 1, breaking up with capitalism, re-languaging for revolution. Number 2, cancel everything, redistribution, rent strike, and more re-languaging for revolution. The work of worlding, that's part 3, rewriting roles and reclaiming self. Part 4 was cultivating compassion, nurture versus attack. And the last part 5 that we did was transmutation, befriend, acknowledge, and articulate. I've gotten a lot of great feedback from these. Mostly people watch them on IGTV. I make them here on YouTube, mostly to create closed captions for different audiences with different levels of access. So today I want to do with you and prompt you to do on your own something that I've been calling EXORCISE exercise. And I've been thinking about this for the last couple of weeks. And to be honest, I've been doing it myself. And sort of similarly to what we talked about in the first episode, exercise sort of like puts us a little bit in the framework of thinking about our relationship to systems and institutions as we might think about other types of relationships and the things that we accept in relationships. And so just like hopefully as you learn to take care of yourself and learn to know what your body needs and know what your mind needs and know what is okay in relationship with 2 other people, you might realize that someone, the way that someone treats you physically, the way that someone talks to you is not something that you can handle. And maybe you would get yourself out of those situations. And many of us have a lot of programming just internally, interpersonally, that makes it very hard for us to get out of those interpersonal situations. And in fact, I would say that the sort of dialectic that I've been using, which is sort of like the ways in which we've been taught to institution as opposed to human, right? So the ways that we've been taught to perform and replicate expectations that are necessary for the kind of forwarding of capitalist logic, as opposed to learning the things that would maybe be the logics of the human body, the human mind, health, care, mutual aid, support, sustainability of the planet, etc., actually play a part in the ways in which we don't necessarily treat ourselves well interpersonally as well, because we are getting reinforcement around bad conditions that are really unacceptable for the safety of our personhood through what we're learning through institutions. Yes. So in the exercise, I invite you to do something that I've been working on myself, and which is the articulation. Again, we're working on articulation and speaking out loud. You can write it down, but I do think speaking it out loud, especially with emotion, is really helpful. The things that are unacceptable. And so what I realized personally is that I often don't say out loud or don't spend a lot of time sort of like holding in myself the how unacceptable certain conditions are, because they seem so stuck, right? They seem so unmutable, so desperate, right? Like the conditions of higher education, for instance, in which I've been working for almost 20 years, and just kind of like having to, as someone who lives in New York, not being able to live by yourself, even if you're 40 and even if you've been working since you were 12, and then, taking it to the next level and being like, this is unacceptable to me. What is the next level of unacceptability, right? And sort of, and this isn't just about like getting angry. It's just about really sort of like putting within a framework of articulation, like the things that we've gotten used to and how actually not okay they are, how anti-human, how anti-planet they are. And I would recommend that you go back to the article, to the episode, excuse me, about sort of anger and articulation, because this is important here, because part of it is just kind of like being able to state plainly and see and really put in words like the things that we have been taught to just get used to, right? And so some of the things that I've been thinking about have to do with, right, the ways in which we work, right? And so for me, I realized that, in the fall, my expenses really changed. And so I, in January, had taken on a second job, not because I wanted a second job and not because I wasn't already working enough to support myself insofar as the number of hours that I was working, but I started working 2 basically full-time jobs simply in order to be able to afford an apartment, which I live in by myself because I'm unpartnered. Just to live, just to have enough money to live and feed myself, and not to save, really. So, there's all these different levels of actually what's unacceptable. So it is unacceptable in a city, in anywhere in the world, for an adult person or anyone who needs to live somewhere to not be able to make enough to do that with a job. And then the other conditions of this, right? It is unacceptable for a adult person to not have housing regardless of their ability to have a job, right? So then we really start getting somewhere, right? It is unacceptable with the amount of food in the world for anyone to go hungry. It is unacceptable for people to not be able to go to the doctor because they do not have like entry into an insurance system. It is unacceptable, right? I mean, then we get, it is unacceptable to put children in cages, and it's unacceptable, et cetera, et cetera. Like, it obviously keeps going. It is unacceptable to destroy the planet. It is unacceptable to, like normalize toxic waste, toxic dumping, right? It is unacceptable to do these things. And I think I often teach the article, the essay "Politics in the English Language" by George Orwell, and he says, that what happens with our language is that the way that I wish I had it right now, the way that we speak about things that are happening in our world, the language creates such a barrier between our experience of the actual situation and the experience of how it's described, that the language itself kind of creates a buffer, and the language becomes, what he says, a defense of the indefensible. Because in creating all of this kind of like narrative webbing, we get sort of used to hearing about stuff, and when we are angry about situations, there is, for so many of us, a feeling of utter impotence, right? And so I think that many of us have stopped ourselves from talking about the things that are unacceptable because of that impotence, and because I think saying how unacceptable things are can really make us feel trapped, right? And so, when you're in a situation that you don't feel like you can get out of, telling yourself how terrible it is, I think for many of us, is something that we avoid as a survival mechanism. However, recognizing that we're in situations in which we feel incredibly unsafe and incredibly trapped can actually help us recognize that we have been experiencing trauma. And once you realize and articulate that you need to exorcise this, that you are in situations that you feel are totally unacceptable, that are causing your body long-term harm, that are causing your somatic system, your nervous system, long-term damage, that like that's where you're finding yourself now. Almost everybody, I think, is finding themselves in this situation, especially in the United States, where bioprecarity is such an issue, right? Where like your precariousness is related to your ability to care for your body or your lack of ability to care for your body. So, I think that right now, as maybe we have, I think it's a real thing of privilege to say that people have time. I don't have time. I'm working multiple jobs still from home. I'm dealing with a immune compromised body with, neurodiversity stuff and making all my own food, etc. But like, we do have an opportunity in whatever time we do have, or maybe just in the ways that we're reflecting, to really find gentleness around what we expect of ourselves right now, and also to really name these unacceptable conditions and see how long we've been in them and recognize the damage that that's done to the body, and really like call that out and be like, there's a reason why I don't feel capable of doing things right now. Maybe it's because I have CPTSD, maybe whatever. You don't need to name it something clinical. It's because I have many, many years of being in a situation that was in a way abusive, right? Like an abusive relationship that you felt so trapped in with an institution, with many institutions, with politics, with this country, that you are so trapped in, and there seems like there's no escape. And so you let yourself stay there because it doesn't seem like there's any other place to go, right? So like Bessel van der Kolk, in his book about trauma, says, the scared animal will return home whether home is safe or frightening. And so we've gotten used to a certain type of home, which is like survival during trauma in unacceptable situations. So today we exercise. We exercise verbally the things that are unacceptable to us, and figure out what it would actually take to start at a baseline of health. So in a period of like acute duress like we're in now, we're not faced with a body that has so much catch-up work to do from being actively traumatized by the job situation, the housing situation, the healthcare situation, by almost every institutional situation that we're forced into, that you can't really even address the thing that's happening right now. And I think, I hope that helps some of you, give yourself a break about like what you're dealing with right now, and then moving us into now sort of like what it really means to kind of like accept that we have a traumatized body, learn the somatic practices, learn the methodologies, starting to get articulate and familiar with ways of getting back to healing and getting back to self and humaning as opposed to institution. And then revolution. Okay. Bye. I love you. Love yourself.